A young mother disappears without a trace in Lake Oswego, Oregon. She's had a fight with her husband and walked out. She's missing, and so is the family car. Police suspect the husband. A local psychic's visions reveal there's been a murder. But will a partnership between the psychic and the cop put the killer behind bars? March 31st, 1986. The police in Lake Oswego, a wealthy suburb of Portland, Oregon, get a call from 28-year-old John Burke. He reports that after a late-night argument, his wife, Alexis, left in the family car. She hasn't been seen for 3 days. Local detective Robert Lee is assigned to the case.
At that point in time, we didn't really know for sure that a crime had even been committed. I mean, let's face it, couples split up. I mean, it happens every day. They have arguments, one or the other will take the family car and leave.
But that theory just doesn't fit this situation.
In this case, there was also a 1.5-year-old child that had Down syndrome, and it would be extremely unusual for any mother to leave her child. Alexis was a very beautiful woman. She was a person that would never stay gone for more than a few hours at a time.
Lee and his investigators suspect the husband is being less than truthful about what happened 3 days earlier.
John Burke was lying to me through his teeth. His reactions were real bad. His physiological responses did not match what he was saying. And my impression was that whatever happened to Alexis, John was responsible for it. And I went back and essentially knocked on the man's door to interview him. And I asked him if it was okay if the crime lab could take a look at the apartment. He said yes, and I signaled for the crime lab to come in, and we conducted our interview outside the apartment while the crime lab did their work on the inside.
They found nothing suspicious, so they focus on finding the car that John Burke claims Alexis drove off in.
We reasonably expected that if we found the car, we were going to find Alexis.
Driven by increasing concern and frustrated at the lack of progress in the investigation, Alexis's mother takes an unusual step. A family friend recommends she call psychic Lorie McQuary. Over the phone, Lorie immediately gets impressions about a very violent encounter.
The very first sense I got, even without a picture, just hearing Alexis's name, I felt that she was gone. I felt that very strongly. It's like a heaviness right in the middle of my chest. I described Alexis, her personality, which was a bit volatile, very intense. John, I thought, was lazy. I thought he was just a guy who was coasting through life, and he had absolutely no plans on changing anything.
John was essentially unemployable by anybody but his own father, because John's work habits were atrocious, to say the least. He didn't want to show up if he didn't feel like it.
I could see an argument between the husband and the wife.
Lorie's view of the night Alexis disappeared matches with what John had been telling the police, but she sees more than the argument.
What I felt with Alexis and John and the argument that I envisioned was that it was in part about finances, and a lot of people fight about finances. That's usually part of a marital situation. But this was fueled by someone being on drugs, alcohol, and I certainly felt that Alexis hadn't been using it. In fact, one of the points that I made to her mom is I said, this woman turned her life around recently. And she said, yes, that was true. And I said, well, I don't think the husband had. And I thought that he was a very weak person and that he was still using drugs, and that in itself was creating a problem in the marriage. I felt that there had been a horrific fight and that it had happened right there in the house and that she was no longer in that area.
Within 4 days, police get a break. The family car has been abandoned in a rest area. Detective Lee finds it full of clues that just don't add up.
Alexis was 5 feet 1 inch tall and weighed approximately 115 pounds. She would have to be very close to the steering wheel to even reach the pedals. And yet the seat was pushed way to the back, like somebody my size or larger was actually driving the car. The ignition key was still in the ignition, and yet the doors were locked. From a police standpoint, that's what we call a proprietary interest in the car. Somebody might purposely leave the keys in, but he wants to lock the doors because he doesn't want somebody to take his car. There was an open map with a city in Washington that was circled. The fact that the map was there to begin with was disturbing because to us it felt like a setup right off the bat.
Although the car reveals unsettling information, Detective Lee knows he needs hard evidence a crime took place.
We did get a couple of dogs to search the entire rest area to see if there was perhaps a body that was around there, and came up with nothing.
Detective Lee's case has gone cold, so when he gets a call from Alexis's mother saying she's contacted a psychic, he's skeptical but willing to listen.
A police investigator really takes information, sometimes from oddball-type sources, and runs with that information just to see if that information is any good, if it can be corroborated, by another direction. I'm a left-brain thinker. I'm very good with things that I can see and touch, feel, that make reasonable sense to me. So I contacted her by phone, and I have to admit I probably was a little bit more flippant than I probably should have been.
I can remember that particular day, Detective Lee calling me and telling me that he was the detective working on the case, that he wanted to take me to lunch, and he wanted to check me out. It didn't sit well.
Detective Lee is anxious to hear what Lorie has to say and convinces her to meet him for lunch. Lorie just wants to help find Alexis's body for her family.
She told me an awful lot about my case.
I see numbers.
Lorie tells Detective Lee that she keeps seeing the number 15. He's intrigued. Alexis's car was found 15 miles from her home. Maybe that's the connection.
I watched his body language. He removed his glasses and put them on the table. And I thought, gotcha. You're interested.
Lorie has a flash of information about the car used to transport Alexis's body.
There's a larger car, older car, and as I'm almost looking at it, I'm back of it and I'm seeing the trunk lid open, and it's a huge trunk.
Detective Lee can't see the link. Alexis's car is a two-door with a small trunk, not the larger car Lorie's describing.
When you're talking about a car, a big car, spend the next 5 minutes driving the highway and you'll see 100 of them.
Lorie's next bit of info makes Lee even more skeptical.
She told me that the younger brother, Kelly, was involved. I'd interviewed Kelly. Kelly was actually playing ball for the college that he attended in Southern California at the time of the disappearance of Alexis Burke.
I can see the brother handling her body, helping carry it. I can see shovels involved, and I can see this family connection.
We checked with the college. They verified the fact that Kelly was literally over 1,000 miles away at the time. That automatically made 8 or 10 of the other things that Lorie told me that couldn't possibly be true simply because his involvement couldn't have been there.
Detective Lee's investigation contradicts many of Lorie's clues, but Lorie is sticking to her guns. If she's right, Lee could be missing some crucial evidence.
I remember telling him, it's going to be different than you think. It will bear me out. Wait and see.
Lorie decides on a dangerous path. She takes the investigation into her own hands and arranges to meet the man she believes to be the killer.
I just had to meet him.
Alexis Burke, a young mother from a suburb of Portland, appears to vanish into thin air. While police suspect her husband, John, they have no evidence a crime has been committed. Alexis's mother contacts psychic Lorie McQuary, hoping she'll be able to help police find her daughter. Lorie decides she has no time to waste. Alexis's husband is packing up the apartment, preparing to rent it out, so Lorie takes a risk.
I knew the minute I met him, looked in his eyes, maybe if I was even fortunate enough to shake hands with him, I would get a further impression.
The police found nothing when they searched the apartment. Now it's Psychic Lorie's turn.
He answered the door. He was very laid back, and I don't know if he was on drugs or not, but he was just very calm. And of course, I pretended to be a renter. As I went through that apartment, of course, I think not just as a psychic, but I think just as another human being, I thought, where is the wife's picture? Is there nothing here? There was nothing, not a thing of hers there, nothing. And she had only been missing a couple of months, nothing.
Lorie's observations are chilling.
And I thought, how cold. You've already buried her, not only literally, but symbolically. She's gone from your life. When I turned to leave and thanked him, I shook his hands. And when I held his hand, I can just feel these around her neck. I know that's how he murdered her.
My reaction when Lorie told me that she'd gone to the apartment and met John was one of utter disbelief. Here was a person that even she thought was a murderer. And I was convinced of it at that point, and yet she's going up and making contact with him in an apartment. I was very upset.
After going to the apartment, that's when I began to get stronger and stronger feelings about where she was buried.
But I still was a basic skeptic. I believe what I can see, what I can prove.
Still, he's willing to listen. Can the psychic help Detective Lee find the body?
One iota, nothing of her belongings there. Once or twice a week, we would sit in hypotheses with each other about what I think happened here and what he thinks.
One of the things that Lorie had come up with right off the bat was 1-5. She didn't know whether the 1-5 meant Interstate 5, whether it was 1.5 miles, or what the significance of the 15 was. In this case, 15 could very easily have been, we're about 15 miles from the place where we thought the death had occurred.
And there was a place called Bell's Landing.
Bell's Landing, according to Lorie, was an important item as far as the relationship between John and Alexis was concerned.
Detective Lee and Psychic Lorie McQuary didn't know if they were looking for an actual place or not. It was like searching for a needle in a haystack.
Maybe this is interesting.
Right down the way over here is where John and Alexis used to spend an awful lot of time. In Oregon, Bell's Landing could either be the side of a mountain where they park machinery when they're clear-cutting an area or doing a logging operation. It could also be a landing alongside of a river. And in this area of Oregon, we have some very, very large rivers, so it's quite plausible that there would be a landing named Bell's somewhere.
That's the frustrating part. Sometimes I get the clues, sometimes I get the symbologies, and it's up to me to make it fit. It's up to me to do the interpretation. And it isn't always like a teletype. I wish it were. We even went out on a couple of searches together in areas out as where she had lived previously, which is not very far from here. So he made the effort. He was at least cooperative and open. You know, it's part of what I saw, but I don't think this is the spot.
So you're not actually getting any...
I'm not getting any vibes, let's put it that way.
Lorie told very specifically that the body was buried.
Her head was just inches away from a little creek. I also felt that he had buried her where he could watch her.
That meant an awful lot to us, but what exactly did it mean? Did it mean he could keep an eye on it from work? Was it near his home?
And it was about that time that I was really talking to him about it's in a field, there's a building, but it's not a regular building like you would just walk in and do business in.
The more time they spend together, the more Detective Lee trusts Lorie's visions. They match his own hunches about the husband.
She has an insight into people and places and things that I don't even understand.
The scenario will play out. I will see the person, I will see the circumstances. Sometimes the reception may become a little hazy. It isn't always crystal clear. It may come in and out, but it's exactly like watching a television show. I could see him eating his lunch. He goes out there, eats his lunch, and watches the site. The site is within range. He can see it. And as long as it's not disturbed, he knows he's not in trouble.
It looks like John is going to get away with murder, but Lorie's psychic instincts tell her he's made a big mistake.
This was something where many people knew what had happened.
Lorie is convinced John has told someone about the murder. Detective Lee rethinks the investigation and decides on a new approach.
We used an awful lot of what we would consider to be behavioral analysis on John. We knew that if we applied pressure to John, that his past history would indicate that he would talk to somebody. And yet we didn't want to put so much pressure on him that he was going to invoke his rights per Miranda, which in the United States is a pretty big thing, simply because it meant that we were no longer able really to talk directly to John without the interference of an attorney.
I've always thought, you know, sometimes the best crimes in the world have been solved by the girlfriend who was dumped. And I knew that John had had a girlfriend.
Just as Lorie predicted, that's exactly what happened.
A former girlfriend of John Burke was living with some girls that were attending college, and she mentioned to one of the girls that she had a former boyfriend who had killed his wife. This girl contacted another girlfriend, who talked to another girlfriend about it, who talked to another girlfriend about it. The sixth girlfriend in line contacted her father. The father of this girl contacted the police department.
Based on the father's tip, police track down John's former girlfriend, Julie, and bring her to Portland. She agrees to cooperate, and they arrange to tape her phone conversations with John.
He said that he'd strangled his wife. Julie got the impression that the body was buried. We were driving by the metal fabrication plant where John and his younger brother worked. And Julie mentioned that John became very different every time that they went by that area.
But John's confession to his old girlfriend isn't enough. Police still need a body to get a conviction. Lorie sees Alexis buried somewhere where John can keep a close watch on her. It makes sense it would be close to where he worked. Following his own intuition and Lorie's clues, Detective Lee decides to search the 15 acres beside the plant. Maybe this is the clue 15 Lorie keeps seeing.
Has a very, very large metal fabrication building with very little in the way of vegetation. The 15 acres that was right next to it was ideal because the trees and the brush provided an awful lot of cover and concealment. Access was pretty much restricted. We sent cadaver dogs over the 15 acres, and their handlers came back with essentially nothing. I was personally disappointed that we were not able to find the body.
As Detective Lee and I would talk throughout the year occasionally about the case, of course, there would be times when he felt that maybe John was going to crack. And I would just always share with him my philosophy. Everything happens when it's supposed to.
It's a real low point in the investigation. Without Alexis's body, police can't charge John with murder. But Lorie is sure John's younger brother Kelly is involved, despite the fact he's given police what appears to be an airtight alibi.
I think Kelly just happened to be the wrong guy at the wrong time, and he was related to the murderer. And so he helped dispose of her body.
Kelly was in Southern California during the specific time frame that Alexis disappeared. And a reasonable person would believe that Kelly could not have had any involvement simply because of the time frames. He was literally over 1,000 miles away at the time.
I generally find what I get as a first impression is correct. And I remember telling him, I'm standing by it.
It's been a year since Alexis Burke went missing after an argument with her husband, John. With the case going cold and based on her track record, Detective Lee decides to listen to psychic Lorie McQuary and take another look at the brother's story.
John essentially has no friends of his own. His best friend in the world is his younger brother. If the younger brother knows anything about it, that would automatically mean that his best friend would know all about the case.
Kelly's friends and former roommates are all law students. They've been interviewed once about the disappearance of Alexis. This time, Detective Lee re-interviews them with a grand jury subpoena in his hand, threatening each with jail time if they refuse to cooperate. From what Kelly's friends have to say, it becomes very clear that Kelly knows something. He's brought in for questioning, and Detective Lee persuades him to cooperate.
He told me everything I wanted to know. Yes, he was in Southern California playing ball, but the game had gotten rained out. He was actually back in Oregon 24 hours earlier than he was supposed to be.
It is a turning point for the investigation. If it hadn't been for Lorie's conviction, police might never have re-interviewed the brother, and his information was just what they needed to get an arrest.
Bob Lee does not give compliments lightly, but he did kind of offer that up and say, well, I guess you were right. And I just felt that there was a shift at that point.
The deal we made with Kelly was very simple. We were concerned that because the body had been in the ground for so long that we would not be able to formally identify Alexis Burke. The dental records we had were several years old. We knew there were not going to be any fingerprints. There was not going to be anything that was actually going to tell us for certain that this was Alexis Burke and not somebody else. And that would be a loophole that a defense attorney would be able to drive a truck through. So we essentially made a deal with Kelly that we would not prosecute him in any way, shape, or form for his complete assistance in the case, including showing us where the body was.
I felt that there had been a horrific fight.
Kelly confirms Lorie's original vision of a strangulation. He tells Detective Lee how a family argument escalated into murder.
Alexis walked out the front door, slammed the door behind her. When she got to the car, she didn't have car keys, and she was in her nightgown. So she came back and started screaming at John.
He had big hands. I can just feel these around her neck. I know that's how he murdered her.
He came over to her and put his hands around her neck. John said to shut her up because she was really making a lot of noise. John says he ripped off the electrical cord and tied it around Alexis's neck just to make sure that she was dead. The body was rolled up in the carpet behind the couch for at least 36 hours. During that time frame, that at least 12 members of his family and her family were in the apartment.
When Kelly finally showed up, he helped John dispose of the body just as Lorie had envisioned.
There's a larger car, older car.
They put the body of Alexis into the back of their father's car, which was a very large Lincoln, dark in color. They then took the body out in the middle of the night and actually dug a hole about 75 yards from the corner of the building where they both worked and buried Alexis.
There's water involved and not a large body of water.
The body was right next to a very, very small rivulet of water. The head was the closest to that water, and it was only several feet away. And of course, the body was under just several inches of dirt.
Lorie's visions are accurate about all the important details of the case. The brothers' involvement, the larger car the body had been moved in, Alexis's body buried in a shallow grave near water, and about John keeping an eye on the site.
He was able to keep an eye on the situation because he went there every single day.
But John Burke still isn't in custody. Because he was out of town, he is oblivious to the discovery of the body.
As it was, John showed up the next day and he was totally in the dark, and by the time he found out about it, it was too late. And I told him he was under arrest for the murder of his wife, and I put on a pair of brand new handcuffs on him. That felt really good.
John Burke is convicted of his wife's murder and sentenced to 13 years in jail. His brother Kelly gets off scot-free because he cooperated with police. With this murder solved, Detective Bob Lee isn't quite as flippant about Lorie's psychic abilities.
I contacted Lorie to tell her, all about the case and how terrifically accurate she was at that point on 28 of the 30 things that she had told me.
I don't know if I feel vindicated so much as I just feel, yes, this stuff does work. And it's important for me to be right, not just for me, but I think it's important for the victim.
Psychic Lorie may be good at predicting the future, but not when it comes to herself. Detective Lee was so impressed with her abilities, he proposed marriage.
I never for a heartbeat thought when I met him that I was going to end up with him.
We've been married now for a little over 18 years. We're a good team.
July 1973, New Haven, Connecticut. In broad daylight, a young woman is brutally murdered in a downtown parking garage. Witnesses see the suspect escape. Forensics discover a trail of evidence, including blood and fingerprints. But it's not enough to capture the killer. Police turn to the world of the paranormal to help solve the case. A psychic's cryptic clues create more questions than answers. But will they catch the murderer and bring solace to a town cloaked in fear? July 16th, 1973, New Haven, Connecticut. Penny Sarah is a 21-year-old dental assistant. In her high school yearbook, she describes herself as having a laughing heart and merry spirit. Since her mother passed away 10 years earlier, she's been a constant support to her father and young sister. On this day, she's taken time off work to go shopping for furniture. She pulls in on the top floor of Temple Street parking garage. She gets out, and before there's time to lock the car, she's attacked. In the struggle, the attacker's hand is cut. The young woman manages to escape to a stairwell, but her assailant corners her and stabs her through the heart. As far as Detective George Mazzacane was concerned, this case was going to be a piece of cake.
We had 5 people who had witnessed the portions of the incident as it occurred. We had the blood type, we had fingerprints, we had everything but his name and address.
Police even had a suspect, Penny's on-off boyfriend. Within hours of the murder, the man is brought in for questioning, and an eyewitness picks him out of a lineup.
However, he had an ironclad alibi. He had in excess of 12 witnesses who put him in a restaurant at a grill cooking.
With the release of the boyfriend, Mazzacane drew his own conclusion.
It was a random assault, and that this individual probably had a criminal record.
If Mazzacane is right, and it was a random act of violence, then there's little hope of a quick conviction. Meanwhile, the forensics team scour Penny's car for clues. Although the technology was pretty basic back in the 70s, they uncover a wealth of evidence.
There was a tissue box on the back seat, and there was a fingerprint on the tissue box. And then we found a handkerchief with the same blood on it, same type blood. Aside from the blood, there was Freon, which is used as a propellant in spray paint and auto body, and there was mechanics grease.
Freon, spray paint, and grease. It doesn't take Sherlock Holmes to figure it out. This is someone who gets his hands dirty working with cars. Mazzacane checks out hundreds of local mechanics, but he can't match the fingerprint. Overnight, New Haven becomes a ghost town. Women are afraid to go anywhere alone. Weeks turn into months. Live leads become dead ends. Mazzacane is frustrated and getting desperate. He makes a decision that most people might consider highly unusual. He decides to bring a psychic on board.
When you got to a point where an investigation becomes dead and you want to jumpstart it, you certainly would revert to a psychic.
Mazzacane gets in touch with Mary Pasquarella Downey, a psychic and time walker. She brings a new dimension to the investigation. For most people, the notion of time is just that, a notion, a means of measuring fragments of our lives. For Mary, time is personified, and she can talk to it.
When I discuss time as a time walker, time surrounds us, past, present, and future. You can't change time. You can move it around and play with it, but you can't change it. But the present past is something that's available. It's like a large library. If I'm dealing with time, it's like you pick a string up and then you begin to wind it like a ball. And the more you wind it, the larger the ball gets and the more information you compile. Time is like a moving camera. It takes pictures and retains things. And if you listen very carefully, time is like a verbal library. It gives you information. It defines things for you. Somebody asked me once what my impression was of time. My impression of time is it's like a large ocean with lots of thought patterns that are boats floating in it. And if you really want to deal with it, you swim out to the boat, climb aboard, and gain whatever information you can get from that little boat. If I get an impression from time of a face, I'll draw a face.
Mary's drawing is similar to an eyewitness description of the killer, but it's not enough to nail him. She does, however, provide some important but cryptic clues.
I just knew blue was extremely important to the case because it kept repeating itself. It says blue is important. Blue is important.
Blue. I said, what does blue tell me? Blue? Well, let's think about this. I'm talking to myself. The car was blue. The incident occurred on the 8th and 10th level. Is there any blue up there? No. What does blue tell me? Was he wearing blue clothes? Did he have blue shoes on or a blue hat? No. Okay, so we'll file that. Blue.
Sure, the car was blue, and Penny's dress was blue, but it doesn't identify the killer.
I got the odor of oil, or like you would smell in a garage. So I tied that to the person and said to myself, oh, this must be somebody that's a mechanic.
Amazingly, Mary had picked up on the mechanic connection. The fact that Mazzacane had been pursuing the possibility that a mechanic was involved had never been released to the public. And then the psychic provided a third cryptic clue.
Water kept repeating itself, and I thought to myself, well, this is New Haven. It's a harbor. You're surrounded by water. At that point, I thought, well, water's important to tell me that it happened here in New Haven. And I let it go at that.
Another non-starter. Doesn't every psychic see water?
I said, this is frustrating. She says, well, I can't tell you anything. I guess I was looking for some kind of an answer to the crime, to put me on, and she said, no, I don't do that.
Mary wouldn't be able to provide the detective with the kind of answers that he was looking for, but she did have insight into the problems with the case.
But I did say blood would tell, that the case would not be solved for years and years and years because the person was somebody that would just slip, very ordinary, and slip right through the cracks. And so it would be years before, but don't give up because blood would tell. I had no idea what that sentence meant at that time.
I said, do I have to wait for this guy to commit a crime? And then we go back to work? And she said, no, it's not going to be like that. She said, it's going to be a long time from now. So I said, oh, that's not very encouraging to myself, you know. No, I gotta prove her wrong or discard all her information or comments at that point.
It looked like the case would never be solved, but there was one man who was determined not to let that happen. Detective George Mezzacane was hunting down the brutal killer of Penny Sarah. When he reached a dead end, he sought the help of professional psychic Mary Pasquarella Downey. Mary insisted that the killer would eventually be caught, but the visual clues she provided were vague. The color blue and a sense of water were not hard evidence. Certainly not something he'd want to share with his superiors.
I never committed this to writing because it would look like nonsense. And then one time I mentioned something in the detective division to someone, and the chief inspector said to me, you're not reading tea leaves anymore, are you? He said, I said, no. He said, well, when you get through with that, he says, I want you to go out and take care of something, get back to doing good old-fashioned police work.
Mezzacane decided to ignore the ridicule of his superior and continue working with Mary for two reasons. Firstly, conventional police work had yielded no positive results. Secondly, he was under pressure from Penny's father, John.
She said, I want to get more information on Penny. I want to hold one of her objects. Did you bring anything with you? I said, no. She said, well, I need some significant part of clothing. The dress she wore that day. I said, I'll get something. So I went back after this was a brief conversation. And I was interested, but I wasn't, I didn't have anything to chew on, you know? It was like, you know, like a light beer, I guess. Everything you wanted and less, you know? I guess they'd have to characterize it that way, you know? There's a lot there, but... And I wasn't surprised. I was interested.
For their second meeting, Mezzacane brought Penny's father along. John Sarah had campaigned to keep this case alive from day one. Every week, he placed ads in local papers in an attempt to find the killer.
He did not want it put on the shelf and wait 20 years for someone to come in and confess to a crime. He wanted to know that there was somebody working on this case every day. And that was his mission, and he accomplished that.
Mezzacane also brought a favorite coat of Penny's. The process of psychic reading through an object is known as psychometry.
When you walk into a house, you either get a good feeling or a bad feeling. When you meet somebody, you either like them or you're wary of them. That's your energy reaching out to protect you. And it's exactly the same as any viewer that's out there has had the deja vu, that's met somebody and been cautious, that's gone into a house and couldn't wait to get out. This is psychometry. That's the world of psychometry. It's energy speaking.
She began to talk about Penny and what kind of a woman she was and what she thought had happened, and kind of recapped what she had told me.
The only thing that we did get from that was that I knew very well that it was somebody that had never seen her before, had nothing to do with her, and that it was just a chance occurrence. Wrong place, wrong time.
Mezzacane's suspicions are confirmed. Right from the start, he also felt the killing was random. After the session, Mezzacane and Penny's father had their own meeting.
I said, what do you think after we left? I said, did you feel comfortable? Did you think she's a quack? Where did she get all this information? How did she? He says, I don't know. He said, but she's good. He said, I believe her. He said, if she can help, I'd like her involved. So I said, okay. She had suggested that she wanted to go to the crime scene and get some impressions of the person who did this. So he was all for that. He said, sure. And I thought it was a good idea. We'd come this far. Why leave that part undone?
It's been over a year since Penny Sarah was murdered. Conventional police work has produced nothing. Out of sheer desperation, Matsakane continues to put his faith in Mary.
And this is actually where it happened?
Yes, right in this area here was where she bolted from the car and ran.
Can this odd couple manage to grasp some psychic evidence from the crime scene and not only capture a brutal killer, but bring some solace to a heartbroken father?
What witnesses said, and he chased her up this way, and then she ran. She was looking around. She said, I've got a terrible headache. She says, I'm getting an awful headache on this side. I said to myself, what has that got to do with anything? Where's that going to lead me? Why was she getting a headache in the area where this guy was standing, where he was observed? Is there a logical explanation for that?
When we got to the garage, the perpetrator became more clear to me as far as what he was like and who he was. So basically, I saw him in a uniform. I smelled the gas. I knew that he worked with a garage. I saw him wiping his hands on an oily rag, and I saw a uniform with a name tag with the letter E on it. And I knew that he worked in a garage. He was probably a mechanic. He was thin. He was wiry. He weighed maybe 160, 65 pounds tops, and that he had the injury to his head.
I mean, that's a lot to digest and sleep on. I mean, you'd be talking in your sleep if you got hit with all that at once.
For Matsakane, returning to the crime scene raises more questions than answers.
My primary questions were what actually did happen and what really was in this man's mind at the time of this murder. And that's what this revisiting stirs in me.
While we were in the garage, one of the things that was you were very aware of is that you're dealing with a girl that was very lovely. Penny Sarah was like a little rainbow. She reminds me so much of one of my children. Logical, reasonable, common sense, sweet and understanding. You could picture her fighting to stay alive. That was the one thing that really began to get to me, is I knew she fought to stay alive. And that really disturbed me. And I wondered why hadn't anybody heard her, because I know she would have cried out.
I don't want to make this sound like I had a religious experience. Maybe I did, maybe I didn't. It was just a feeling that I had. I felt that she was getting information from a gift that she had. And I never felt that with another person in my life before, and I've worked with some psychics before, and I've worked with some after, and I never got that feeling, you know, that I was going to get help, or I was going to get that kind of, you know, it never happened again.
From the very onset of getting the case, I knew that blue was extremely important. Blue, 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 kept repeating. And then as we approached the garage, I knew that where we were going would be the blue floor. So as we entered the garage and George was driving up, I noted that there were numbers on the floor. So I thought I was wrong.
Later on, I checked with one of the attendants, and he did say that years ago, they did color code the floors, but then they changed it to a numeric format.
So I was right.
So she was right.
So I was right,
Yeah.
and then it was blue.
Yeah.
Oh, good. Another confirmation.
I had the feeling that this woman knew something. And I honestly thought that she was going to tell me who did it. Go get this guy, here's his name. I wrote it down and his address. It was scary in that someone could know that kind of information and not have enough to take you over the top. That was frustrating.
Mary's visit to the parking garage had produced several new clues. However, every psychic has their limit.
I'm not involved beyond the point of my first initial investigation. There are a lot of psychics that have the same philosophy that I have, that we are not going to solve a murder case. We are not police. We are going to be an informant, somebody that informs them of something that might be, that they may have missed or not paid attention to. A good psychic will only do what they're asked to do and nothing more, and walk away.
Detective Mazzacane continues working on the Penny Sarah case. Years pass with no significant progress. Then, in 1979, Mazzacane decides that he too has reached his limit. After 17 years with the New Haven Police Department, the detective retires.
I just hit a stone wall, I think. I just hit the wall. And I was getting totally consumed with this. And Mary had given me all these leads, but I needed something to put everything together, and I just couldn't. I'm not making excuses. I'm just saying that it got to a point where I just, I didn't feel like I was useful anymore.
With Mazzacane out of the picture, one of Mary's predictions has already come true. 5 years have passed since the murder, and the case still hasn't been solved. In fact, it would be another 6 years before there's a break in the case. A woman calls the police and claims that her husband threatened to do the same thing to her as he'd done to Penny Sarah. The man is arrested and charged with Penny's murder. Is this the man Mary Downey saw in her visions? Will John Sarah finally get justice? Because although it's been 11 years, the statute of limitations doesn't apply to murder. After one of the largest homicide investigations in New Haven history, a suspect is about to go on trial for the murder of Penny Sarah. Before a word of evidence is heard, the retired detective who spent 5 years working the case has reached his own verdict.
I just knew he was not guilty. We had already checked this guy out 3 or 4 years ago. He had an alibi, he was working that day.
Mazzacane was right. On the eve of the trial, the prosecutor made a startling announcement. The suspect's blood was type A. The blood found at the crime scene was type O. Case dismissed. The man was fully exonerated, but the damage was done. His life would never be the same. It's only in movies the wrongly accused walk away smiling. Once again, the Penny Sarah case goes cold. Years pass. Fortunately for this case and many others, in the early 90s, the landscape of police work in America would change forever with the creation of a computerized fingerprint database. One of the first prints uploaded onto the new system is from the box of tissues found in Penny Sarah's car. Because of the backlog with the new system, it took 3 years to find a match. The guy's name, Grant. First name, Edward.
And I saw a uniform with a name tag with the letter E on it.
The letter E for Edward, exactly as Mary predicted, and at one point Grant had fixed cars for a living, another prediction of Mary's that proved absolutely accurate. Grant had been arrested in 1994 on a domestic violence rap. He had no prior convictions.
The person was somebody that would just slip, very ordinary, and slip right through the cracks.
Once again, Mary was spot on. For all intents and purposes, Grant was a clean-living, nondescript citizen.
Don't give up because blood would tell.
Mary Downey couldn't possibly have known what blood would tell meant, because when she predicted it more than 20 years ago, forensic DNA technology didn't exist. And it transpired that on the day of the murder, Grant had been to the nearby Veterans Administration Hospital to receive treatment for an old head injury.
This guy's got 3 plates in his head. 30 years later, you find she was getting his headache. She was telling me this almost 30 years earlier.
All of Psychic Mary Downey's predictions had hit the mark. But what about the vision of water, the one clue both Matsukane and Mary dismissed? It turns out Grant lived in the nearby town of Waterbury. As for Grant, the fingerprint match allowed police to get a blood sample so that his DNA could be compared to blood found at the crime scene. It, too, was a positive match.
I just couldn't believe it, but I could believe it. And I knew it was him.
On Thursday, June 24th, 1999, almost 26 years after the crime was committed, Edward R. Grant was arrested for the murder of Penny Sarah. In September 2002, he was sentenced to serve 20 years in prison. He won't be eligible for parole until he's 80 years old. Up to the end, Grant maintained his innocence, so we may never know why Penny Sarah was murdered. The tragic irony of this story is that Penny's father, John Sarah, a man who had devoted more than 20 years of his life trying to help bring the killer to justice, died just 8 months before Grant was caught.
I could see John going to heaven and saying to God, "Now listen, God, it's been all these years, and Mary said this was going to be solved, so I want it solved." And God said, "Okay, we'll take care of it." And that's what happened.
They say truth is stranger than fiction. And in this case, the truth was very, very strange.
A loved husband and father goes missing. His wife is frantic to find him.
I gotta get to him, we gotta find him.
A psychic finds herself as a go-between, relaying clues she believes come from the man who's gone missing.
It's Fickle, it's Fickle.
Will this clue help police solve the mysterious disappearance?
I could see the sincerity in her face. She believed what she was telling me.
He wants to be found.
March 1st, 1997, in the small town of Sharpsville, Pennsylvania, local chef Daryl Cozart headed out on Saturday night after work. He hasn't returned home to his wife Jeanette and their 2 small children. She knows something's not right.
He told me he was gonna go to see some friends at a bar, which was very unusual for him. Daryl didn't usually go hang out with friends. He was a really family man.
On Sunday, when Daryl still hasn't returned home, Jeanette Cozart reports him missing to the police. To them, it's just a missing person case.
It's not uncommon for a spouse to report somebody missing who maybe run off with some friends to get away for a few days.
I knew something had to have happened to him for him not to contact me and not to let us know he's okay.
Usually within 48 hours, the person appears back at home and maybe has to eat a little crow or has some patching up to do at home, but they always come back.
They pretty much just told me, don't worry. He's probably just on a drinking binge. And I'm like, no, this is not my husband. He didn't do those kind of things. He went to work, he came home. This is not what he did.
Police weren't aware of any problems at home or what would make him run off.
They told me that it would be 72 hours, of course, before they could list him as a missing persons. And that's when we kind of took matters into our own hands and started making flyers up because we were frustrated. I just thought, well, maybe he's hurt. I gotta get to him, we gotta find him.
Jeanette's mother drops off some missing person flyers at the newsstand owned by psychic Mary Ellen Rodriguez. Her son-in-law, Daryl Cozart's been missing now for 2 days.
She handed me the missing persons paper. When I touched it, it seemed like the energy of Daryl, all of a sudden, it opened something up, and there was Daryl standing next to her. Here was Mary on this side of me, and here was Daryl on this side of me, and I'm watching two worlds going on at the same time. Here's Daryl on the other side with his hands pressed against like a wall, saying, just show me where the door is, just show me where the door is. And just show me where the doorway is so I can come back. I need to come back. I said, Mary, he's dead. He's dead. He's standing right next to you. And she turned and looked and still wasn't aware of him there like I was. I saw him as if I could touch him, and I saw her knowing I could touch her.
Jeanette's mother tells her daughter of the bizarre encounter she had that morning. Jeanette goes to the newsstand. She hopes this total stranger, Mary Ellen, will be able to help her find Daryl.
I walked in, and Mary Ellen walked up to me, and she put her arms around me and just held me.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry, Jeanette.
She just kept repeating, I'm so sorry. I'm so, so sorry.
I am so sorry.
She told me that that wasn't her, and it was Daryl telling me he was sorry. He was just so, so sorry.
Mary Ellen explains to Jeanette it is Daryl speaking and acting through her.
I said, he's standing there next to you. He's so sorry. I said, he's trying to find his way back. I said, but he can't come back.
She had told me that he was shot, that we would find him, and he would have a rope around his neck.
So sorry.
Mary Ellen says she became a conduit between two worlds, with Daryl pushing her to relay messages to Jeanette.
Daryl kept saying to me, ghost, tell her ghost. I just said to her, does ghost mean anything to you? And she reared back and put her hand up and said, yes, that was our favorite movie.
The moment she said it, I had chills from my head down to my toes. And at that moment, I knew it was him, and that this was the real thing, and that no matter how much I wanted him to be here on earth with us, he was no longer.
Later the same day, Mary Ellen gets another visitor, Detective Jerry Smith.
Hi, Gary. How are you tonight?
He's a policeman in the town just next to Sharpsville, the town where Daryl Cozart lived.
When Jerry came in, I said to him, you know that guy that's missing, he's dead.
First I looked at her like, you know, you're nuts, you know. She says, no, I have this vision, and I see things, and he's laying out into a field or a swamp. It's real marshy, she said, and I could see he has something around his neck, like a rope or a chain, and that he's shot. And I didn't know what to make of it.
And he said, how do I know he's dead? I said, well, he's standing right next to you.
I thought at first she was joking. And then I could see the sincerity in her face that she wasn't joking. She believed what she was telling me. And it's bizarre, and it makes it difficult because you can't use apparitions or visions as testimony in any court of law as the laws as we know it. So to vow or to affirm that something is true based on a vision, the courts will not recognize it. So basically it becomes at that point just a piece of information to guide the investigator, more of a tool than anything.
Detective Smith decides he has to pass on the information because of Mary Ellen's credibility.
It's not like some transient that just comes walking in off the street and says, hey, I had a vision. This is a business person who has a good reputation in the community and has had that business there for years.
Detective Smith meets with the Sharpsville police, the neighboring police force with jurisdiction over the case.
I remember saying to him, I don't think I'm crazy. I'm not drinking. I'm not smoking anything. But Mary claims she had a vision, and the person you're looking for is deceased, and he was murdered. I remember the officer kind of looked at me like, yeah, you're right. I do think you're crazy. But he took the information down.
Skeptical, the Sharpsville police check out Detective Smith's information. An officer visits Mary Ellen, who says Daryl is telling her what to say.
Well, yes, I said he's dead. And that seemed to be what I kept saying over and over. Daryl wanted him to know where he'd been shot, and I told him. I was feeling everything that he was feeling, and I felt the bullet.
Despite Mary Ellen's clues, police are still not convinced this is anything more than a husband who's run off.
He was such a great father. He loved his kids so much. Playing football with his son and helping his daughter learn how to ride her bike.
It seemed as if nobody wanted to do anything about finding this young man.
It was a very frustrating time because I wanted answers so desperately.
Mary Ellen felt Daryl was begging her not to give up.
Please tell them that I'm dead. Please tell them they need to be looking for me.
A father of two just disappears one night in a small Pennsylvania town. Daryl Cozart's family feels something is wrong and start searching for him. From the moment psychic Mary Ellen Rodriguez first hears about the case, she says she's had Daryl as a constant companion.
Every morning when I crossed the bridge into Pennsylvania, he would tip my mirror down, and his eyes would be looking back at me in the mirror. And I would say, "Good morning, Daryl." And that would begin our day.
Mary Ellen believes he's trying to tell her what happened, but she can't always make sense of the clues.
He's screaming it in my ear. "It's Fickle, it's Fickle."
She kept pacing back and forth and just, what do you mean, fickle? What's so fickle? Who's being fickle?
Daryl has now been missing for more than 72 hours. The police decide to investigate his disappearance and question people who work with him to see if they can get a lead.
There were really no signs that there was any foul play because everybody they spoke to liked Daryl, and he was a likable person, and there was really no suspects as far as he didn't have any enemies.
They do find one person who may have some information about that night.
They had interviewed co-workers of his, and one woman was focused in on as being one of the last people to see Daryl.
But police have no reason to suspect her. Jeanette Cozart knows Daryl's co-worker, but only by her first name, Cindy or Cynthia.
When I walked into the restaurant where he had worked, Cindy was there. She asked me what I was doing there, and I says, "I'm looking for Daryl. Have you seen Daryl?" "Well, no, I saw him last night. He worked here last night, and he took me home, but that's the last time I saw him." I'm like, "Okay." And then she hugged me and told me that she was sure everything was going to be all right. He'll turn up.
That's not what Mary Ellen is telling Jeanette. She believes Daryl's been shot, but she can also feel that he's been hung. It's like she is experiencing what happened to Daryl.
I felt like I was choking, and I wanted to pull this away from my throat, so I felt that there was a rope around my neck. My forehead would itch. I start scratching my forehead, and I feel like I'm adjusting a bandana on my forehead. So I began to realize that at the moment that he was murdered, he was actually wearing a bandana.
It wasn't just an itchy forehead. Mary Ellen says Daryl tried to get her attention in other ways.
He would start banging on my walls. My walls would start banging, and my phone would start ringing. Again, trying to get my attention to do something. Come on, you got to do something. You have to do something. You have to call them, tell them, and I did.
Driven by Daryl's desperation to be found and her desire to help Jeanette, Mary Ellen goes out searching for clues night after night.
I truly went looking for the body because nobody believed me. And Jeanette was, her life was in too much turmoil with news media and trying to keep her children calm. I felt like a search party of one in my off time. And I would go out looking for him, hoping that he would take me to where his body was. I feel his excitement when I'm really close to where he may be. He gets excited, like, this is it, and he'll say, this is it, here, here, here.
Mary Ellen feels Daryl keeps bringing her back to one street.
That's where his body was. I felt that that's where it had happened, right there in that area. Daryl acknowledged that it was right around in here. He said to me, it was right around in here. This is where they killed me. This is where they murdered me. He was very frustrated at the lack of enthusiasm that the police department had for finding him. I didn't know how else to help him except to go out looking for him.
She was determined, and I think Daryl was pushing her.
Finally, after days of searching, Mary Ellen gets a signal she believes is from Daryl.
I was out looking for a sign of where Daryl may be. I was talking with Daryl, and I said to Daryl, please help me to help you. Show me where you may be, or even in the area, show me. When I found the sneaker, it was pointed west towards the airport, and so that may have been a sign that he's either in this area or he's down that way, down west to the airport.
Mary Ellen was worried no one would believe her, so she doesn't tell police about the shoe, but she feels it may have been a sign after all. A week after his disappearance, police find Daryl Cozart's van near the airport. Inside the van, police discover evidence of Daryl's murder.
The van had blood. You went on the side doors, there was blood on the carpet.
There's only a couple ways you can get blood in there. And unfortunately, one is the person's deceased.
Mary Ellen has been telling the police Daryl's dead from the beginning.
So that became a validation for me. For Daryl, that was a sigh of relief that, see, now they know I'm dead.
It's now a murder investigation, and police are under pressure to find Daryl's body.
We didn't know exactly where he was killed or by who.
The last thing you want is the public to feel unsafe, like there's a killer on the loose somewhere, and am I next?
But to find the killer, the police need more evidence. Mary Ellen feels Daryl is trying to help by telling her where to find his body.
They showed me a picture. There was a calendar up on my wall. It was a bog area with high grass and the little fence. That's where his body was.
Mary Ellen knows Daryl is desperate to be found and feels him getting more and more agitated. She is shocked by what she says happened next.
I'm driving to church, and he grabs my steering wheel. He says, I want to go to the police department. I want them to know I want to be buried in a gray pinstripe suit. Finally, I had to strike a deal with him, and I said, okay, Daryl, I tell you what. I said, you let me go to church, and then afterwards, I will drive to the police department, and we'll talk. And he conceded, and he let go of the steering wheel.
So after church, Mary Ellen pays a visit to the Sharpsville police to ask why they're not checking nearby bogs, like the picture she showed them on her calendar.
And I said, you've got a picture of where he's located. Can't you find that area? Can't you just search? Can't you go out and look? I know he's face up, and my forehead is still itchy, so he's still wearing the bandana.
The officer isn't convinced there's any merit to what she's saying.
He said, I don't have the manpower to do that, and that could be any place. Daryl was answering all the questions. And at that point, the police officer said to me, will you tell him that if he wants to wear that suit, we better find him soon.
Mary Ellen relays messages back and forth, and finally, one last bit of information from Daryl for the Sharpsville police.
And he said, tell him before Tuesday. Before Tuesday morning, they will find me.
Daryl Cozart has been missing now for over a week, and psychic Mary Ellen Rodriguez is convinced the police are on the verge of finding his body. Monday afternoon, all of Mary Ellen's predictions come true.
I could feel his excitement. My hands were trembling, I was shaking. He was very excited about they had found him.
Another break for the police. A passing truck driver on Highway 11 near the Pennsylvania-Ohio border spots a body wrapped in plastic, dumped by the road. Daryl is found by a bog, exactly as Mary Ellen had predicted.
A truck driver happened to come along down a road near a swamp and had spotted what he thought was a body laying out in this grassy area, called police, and police arrived and it ended up being Daryl.
One of the most horrific things I've had to go through in my life. Losing Daryl this way, having him murdered, was hard. But telling our children was the hardest thing I have ever done.
It was 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock when they found his body, and he was really excited, and my phone rang, and I said, I know, you found him, didn't you? I already knew. And they did find him face up, and he was wearing a bandana.
He was found shot and had a rope around his neck, almost exactly the way she said he would be.
Now do you believe me? And Daryl was saying the same thing. Now do you believe me?
There was things that she described that would make you believe or make you suspicious that she may have been there, because there was things that were not released to the press that were found at the crime scene that she described. Call it coincidence, call it phenomena. It's unexplained.
The evidence confirms what Mary Ellen has been telling the police. The rope didn't kill Daryl. He'd been shot 5 times at close range with a .44 caliber gun.
That Daryl died a very violent death.
I saw the whole thing. He showed it to me. He didn't know he was going to be killed. He didn't know that he was being set up to be murdered.
The discovery of Daryl's body leads to the police getting a tip. It's from a man who has information about someone who knew Daryl.
Originally, he wasn't suspicious. He just said that he asked them to move the furniture, and they went into the garage, and there was a van in there, and there was a large tarp rolled up sort of like a carpet. And he said when he asked them to move this, he can feel legs. And then that's when he says, is this an individual?
Shockingly, the answer is yes, and the friend knows this person is dead. But he doesn't tell police until after the discovery of Daryl's body.
Just because of friendship, he just let it go. And then when it became public as to who the individual was, and he decided that he would go ahead and tell us basically what he did.
Mary Ellen has one unsolved clue, and it's about to make sense.
It's Fickle, it's Fickle, it's Fickle.
It turns out the name of the suspected killer is Frank Fickle. The tip is from a friend of his. A few days earlier, he'd helped Fickle move a body.
Kind of threw me for a loop, because this is one of the things Mary Ellen had told me that Daryl kept saying to her was Fickle. He keeps repeating Fickle, she was saying. I'm like, well, what's Fickle, you know? And you never think of it as a person's last name.
With a search warrant in hand, police comb the Fickle home looking for evidence.
And he'll say, this is it, here, here, here.
It's the same street Mary Ellen Rodriguez has been driving past looking for clues.
And it was quite apparent that he was shot in that basement.
The killer had tried to destroy evidence.
A couple walls you can see had just been painted. You can see the floor has been washed down, and you can see that they were using bleach, things such as that, and some of the material was still there, so you can tell it was just fresh.
But the killer hadn't been able to get rid of all of the evidence.
Searching the basement, I could see different fibers still clinging to the cobwebs. Then as I kept on examining the area, I can see, even though there's minute, you can see buds spatter in different locations on the furnace pipes. And in one place I seen up in the rafters, there was a fairly good-sized piece of scalp, too.
At the moment that he was murdered, he was actually wearing a bandana.
Mary Ellen was right. Daryl had been wearing a blue bandana when he was shot.
We found a bandana up in the upstairs or on the first level floor that had the bullet hole in. And it had one bullet hole in the same area of where he was shot.
Police interview Frank Fickle's estranged wife. It turns out police have already talked to her. She's Cynthia, who worked with Daryl and was one of the last to have seen him alive. She said Daryl arrived at the Fickle home around midnight. She invited him in and sent him to the basement to smoke. But she told police she had no idea Frank Fickle was waiting there to kill Daryl.
Fickle was a person who was very jealous and had made himself believe that his wife had been having an affair with Daryl.
He was supposed to go down a cellar to smoke some grass. And when he got down, the shooting took place in the basement.
Frank Fickle had used his body as target practice.
Frank Fickle is arrested on Wednesday, March 12, 1997, for murdering Daryl Cozart in a jealous rage.
I don't even know how to explain how you feel inside when you look face to face at the man that murdered your husband. And anger, frustration, just emptiness.
The arrest is just a week and a half after Daryl went missing. Frank Fickle is found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life imprisonment.
Daryl didn't deserve to die. He deserved to be here to raise his children and to love his children. God put him here for a reason, and Frank had no right to take him out of God's picture. No right.
Mary Ellen's involvement maybe led investigators to dig a little deeper, to talk to a few more people, because early in the investigation it was just a missing person. And generally a missing person investigation doesn't entail bringing in detectives. Well, if Mary Ellen would approach me again with any information on a crime we were investigating, I certainly would talk with her, and I certainly would take the information and give a little more weight than I would have the first time.
I would not have been able to take that journey without Mary Ellen. Without her, I would have been extremely lost. And we may never have found out who did it.
And Daryl finally did get to wear his gray striped suit at his funeral. For that, Mary Ellen is grateful.
My life changed forever when I became divided between two worlds, the earth world and the spirit world.